Okay, so we're ending the Moral Psychology Research Group Conference here at the Consortium on Moral Decision Making. We're having a series of roundtables, having different scholars talk about what they find exciting about the field of moral psychology. And so I thought in this last session, we have several graduate students from different schools who are coming together to think about not spilling coffee, and also what do they find the most exciting about the future of moral psychology, and what do you see as the use and the value, if any, of interdisciplinary dialogues like the ones we've had here. And so we have Wiktoria Pedryc from Penn State Psychology. We have Sofía
Rodríguez Chaves.
Rodríguez Chaves.
I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. From Carnegie Mellon. Sofía Rodríguez Chaves from Carnegie Mellon. Josh Wagner from Penn State Psychology, and you're from the business school at Carnegie Mellon. Yeah. Iris Chung from Psychology here at Penn State, and Becca from Psychology here at Penn State. And so to start us off, I guess we could ask, what do you think is exciting about the future of moral psychology? You're all interested in very different questions and approaching it through different lenses. So what do you think, from your perspective, is exciting for the field moving ahead?
Something that I think is fun in particular is that as time goes on, we moralize more and more things. At least that's what it feels like to me interpersonally. And something that's cool about that is it means we can find more and more little areas of life where morality seems to matter. Right now I'm working on a project of how we view the morality of athletes and how that relates to what you do with your fantasy team. We're interested in the morality of humor, how we kind of discuss our humor through moral lenses and how that might affect whether we think things are funny or if we think things are moral because they're funny. And so I think moral psychology is cool because we have these very base questions, and then we also have very applied questions, and we also have a bunch of questions in between. Like, morality functions in a lot of different areas of our life, and there are just so many to explore.
I think for me, parting from that, it's not only the many areas, but also we're moving a little bit in the direction of moral influence. And so how morality is not only an individual thing, even though that's mostly how we study it, but also how can our moral behavior influence other people's behavior, and that way starting to get outcomes, like more desirable outcomes, if that's what you desire. But it's this jump of, okay, it's not only a personal individual thing, but also how does it connect to how other people think of morality, and how can you influence that?
I think building off of that, when we have this shift to kind of how it influences other people, it grows the scale of it almost. And I think there's been this larger trend of moving towards things that are more and more societally impactful and relevant. Not that you can't do those, micro things, but even yesterday we had the talk that was more traditional trolley dilemma things, but it was still framed in how it's relevant to autonomous vehicle issues. Yeah, so I think we really make an effort now to show how our research is applicable and very important to society tangibly.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I also think that as our society expands with the advance of social media and whatnot, like the introduction of artificial intelligence and all that Josh talked about yesterday, it feels like the cultural element also is getting into more consideration, and it's supposed to be deemed as more important, because I'm from Korea, where what I think about is the most important when I'm back in Korea, and what I think is the most important when considering morality when I'm in the States is starkly different. And it's really interesting because I myself don't change. I'm what I am, but it really depends on what kind of culture I'm immersed in and what kind of people that I'm engaged with. So I think morality constantly shifts, and that's what makes it so interesting to see.
I would agree with this. I think it's very interesting now to see how social norms develop, and sometimes how people maybe don't even think that the norms that we have and we accept in daily life maybe overlap with what we think about morality and what's moral and immoral. And so I think it's very interesting to study it cross-culturally, but also within even the US, which is such a diverse population, and see whether our assumptions or our intuitions about morality really fit with the norms that we have in our society, maybe even the norms in the legal system, for example. So I think what to me is important or interesting in moral psychology is how we can use our moral intuitions and then try to see whether the legal system actually like reflects it. And I think that's also interesting for individuals that come from like different cultures or different countries, like myself from Poland and you from Korea, and how basically our norms and our like moral intuitions would fit into these like different contexts.
I mean, that's great. It seems like the intersection between individual psychology, cultural shift, cultural norms, generalizability across cultures, and trying to think about the impact of translational connections of what we do, and seeing how morality is embedded, as you were saying, Becca, in so much of our everyday experience. I think it does seem to capture a trend that is happening in a lot of moral psych in many respects. And so I guess building on that, one second question that I'd be curious what you all think is, at this conference we've heard from, business ethics, from anthropology, communications, media ethics, psychology, philosophy. How do you think we could try to draw upon threads from these different disciplines to advance some of these goals, whether it's to affect change institutionally, to try to show how our work has impact, to try to help people be aware of cross-cultural differences, or to understand how morality plays out through the lens of everyday experiences in an ever-growing way? What are your thoughts on how to draw upon those interdisciplinary insights?
So for me, sorry, okay, it actually, based on something you just said about the assumptions that we make, I think they're at the base of what we're studying. And so we have all of these assumptions, but whenever you talk to people from different disciplines, they question these assumptions. And so there's great value in trying to think of the topics from different perspectives. And that also helps us understand a little bit more, or having different theories of why something is happening. So for example, right now we're taking a course with people from the Heinz College, from information systems. And whenever we say something, they're like, but what is the underlying assumption of that? And so it forces us to question ourselves and to really think, is there a better way to approach this? Or a different, not necessarily better, but different, that could still help us advance the topic that we're studying.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with this. I think that disciplines can really build on top of each other. And I think it's also just useful to have this conversation, even just for having or developing the same vocabulary to talk about the same concepts. Because right now I think there's a big divide and sometimes often a misunderstanding, especially if a researcher is trying to enter an interdisciplinary area and is maybe like reading papers in a different field that they don't have a personal expertise with. And so I think it's very easy to sometimes misunderstand certain concepts or the intentions behind certain concepts. And I think that's still kind of a little bit of a gap in moral psychology, that's even in the interdisciplinary work. Many people come from a certain expertise, which I think is obviously great, but they try to maybe apply their work to other disciplines or connect the dots, which is very beneficial. However, I think there's still a gap in terms of maybe trying to actually work with researchers from other fields, and so we can have a more open and collaborative conversation about and while developing the studies. So we're always on the same page, or whether we're talking about the same things, whether we have the same understanding, and how we can combine knowledge from these fields together instead of having just one person from our one expertise trying to apply their knowledge to the other fields that they might not know as much about. So I think would be very beneficial for moral psychology in the future to not only have this spaces like this where we can share research from different areas, but also create more collaborative work across the disciplines.
Yeah, I totally agree with both Sofía and Wiktoria. And this consortium/conference just reminded me how important it is to be open to everything, for every field, how the same thing can be translated in different ways depending on what kind of field you're engaged in. And especially for instance, this is a very minor thing, but when you're doing lit search, we usually tend to focus on looking into journals that are related to social psychology, and we sort of try to not look into, even if it's the same psychological field, we try not to look into, we sort of avoid looking into clinical field, whatnot. Other fields of psychology, we sort of not tend to look into as much as we look into social psychology. But after hearing people from marketing, from anthropology, from philosophy, it sort of reminded me that I should be open to more areas, and there are a lot of fields that are looking into moral issues, and that I should be more attentive to those fields as well.
Yeah, I think beyond like applications and stuff like that are super important, but I think something else that's always interesting and cool to remember about interdisciplinary work is that different fields usually come with different skills. So my undergrad degrees are in psychology and philosophy, and I think part of what makes me good at what I do as a psychologist is a lot of my philosophy background. I think without my philosophy background, I would be much worse at what I'm doing now. And so I think it's also kind of just cool to think about, even if you're struggling to have these interdisciplinary ties, I think many people are open to it. But if for whatever reason you're struggling, I also think it's a good idea to just try and immerse yourself in other fields. You know, you can always, learn new skills, pick up new things. And so I think it's always a good idea, even if you're not sure how your work applies or you're not sure how you would work with somebody else, there's never anything wrong with trying to open your mind up to a different area.
Fellow psychology, philosophy double majors yet.
Yep.
I completely agree with everything that's been said. I mean, from the broadest challenging assumptions perspective, it really forces you to think about things that we take for granted in new ways. And in, a conference context, when you are explaining research and talking about research, often we're in a disciplinary conference and assume that you have this shared understanding, and it requires you to actually break down those assumptions and then often receive feedback of, is that the best way to think about it? Or even just we think about it in a different way. And then to the literature point, we actually had something last night at dinner where Sofía mentioned a couple papers from a business context that were completely relevant to what I do that I had never heard of. So I think there's, a lot there. And then I guess the only thing I'd add is I think along the challenging assumptions, it translates to even just the finer experimental design levels of different fields use different measures. And sometimes you just don't even know what other fields are doing. And to the analysis level for, those of us that are interested in data science, you learn different analytic techniques that aren't common to our field. And then it allows you to answer new questions, which translates to then changing your design to answer this new question.
So I think it's really wonderful to hear all of your insights. Does anybody have any pressing, burning message they have for the field of moral psychology, or anything else you found interesting or potentially useful coming out of the conference?
I think I found that people are very willing to discuss their ideas and give you feedback. So I was not really expecting to interact with so many people, faculty from different universities that I've read many papers of, and they're big names in the field or whatever, that they would be interested in my research as a first year PhD student, and they would be able to give me so much relevant feedback. And even if they were not in psychology but in philosophy or in other areas, that are very generous, offering to send me papers and provide additional feedback in the future. And I think this was a really wonderful experience for me. Definitely decreased some kind of imposter syndrome as well in the field, seeing that we're all just working through things in here and trying to support each other, and we all have the same goal of just advancing the field and gaining more understanding of what's really happening in human cognition. So I think that was a great outcome for me of the conference. I'm grateful to be here.
And one of the great things about this particular group, the NPRG, we're hosting, they've been together for so long. It's some of the people like Walter, Senator Armstrong, who I've rotated through his lab as a grad student, or Paul Davis, who I took philosophy classes with as an undergraduate, and seeing them struggle in good ways, so towards the same kinds of problems and questions. And I think the hope is that it gives you a sense for the longer arc of how we ask questions and how it's always this process of questing after what's a new way to take a lens on an idea, or what's a new perspective we can take.
So for me, coming from a business school where, yes, ethics is always there, but it's not necessarily the most salient topic. it was also a great opportunity to see what other fields are doing in ethics and how then translated into how does this matter in a business context. I think we always say we spend so much of our time in our jobs, that this is such an important area. And so how can we bring more of these ethical applications within the organization to make it a better place? I know that sounds a little bit like an utopian view.
Yeah.
But it was very refreshing to see people from different fields and all of these ideas, and then just go back and then see how that would also apply to those contexts.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great way to end. Let's put these ideas and actions to good use. And thank you all for your time and feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl.